Mandated by the Kentucky Constitution, lawmakers entered their 60-day workday regular session at midnight, April 15th. But it appears the final 2 hours of the session were anything but slow. In the end, $5.1 billion in projects were sent to the governor's desk for his signature. We have fresh from the House and the Senate floor in Frankfort, Representative Jody Richards and Senator Mike Wilson. When Kentucky Outlook continues, stay with us. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Kentucky Outlook. I'm your host, Barbara Deeb. Well, it's history now, the 2014 session of the regular General Assembly in Kentucky, and it appears already calls are coming in to call a special session. We're going to talk about that as we welcome to the program at this point Representative Jody Richards, representing District 20. And we might make mention that we did invite Senator Mike Wilson, but he's been detained. We're hoping that he's going to join us for the second half of the show. We're glad to have you, Jody.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well,
glad to be home.
Well, you're glad to be home. And as we mentioned in the introduction, it was a late session. Ended at midnight. It went right up to the 9th hour.
It really did. And the last couple of hours were interesting. But, you know, all in all, I think it was a good session. I think we did a good deal for education, one of the best budget in 6 years for education, elementary, secondary. Not as good for higher, which I hope we'll talk about a little bit.
Of course we'll talk about that. But let's talk about the biggie, the road building plan.
Yeah.
Yes.
The road plan is really good for our area. Of course, we're one of the fastest growing parts of the state. So as you would expect, we have a good portion, a good amount of roads. And of course, I-65, not in Warren County anymore, but it is scheduled to be finished with this budget. And that's really good. For one who travels I-65 as much as I do, that really needs to be done. And then locally, Three Springs Road, good deal of improvement on it. 3 lanes. It already has 5 lanes out to Fleeland and 3 lanes on to Long Road. It is that is a very fast-growing part of the county. Also in that part of the county, 31W South from Dillard Road on down past Mike Buchanan Park will be 5-laned. That goes past Warren South Warren High School, and the subdivisions across the road. Also 185 Richardsville Road. That's really important because it will open up the north part of the county and those counties to the north and west of Bowling Green. Then Shive Lane, we have that across the road from Three Springs, that is on the area. Road plan.
Yeah, I can see the viewers cringing because, you know, while it's wonderful that we're getting these monies into our area to improve roads, that also means construction and delays, yes.
It does, but with the community growing as fast as we do, and there will be some money for Scottsville Road to improve it, not 6-lane it yet, which I really want to do, but at this point, a double lane going into Cave Mill off of and taking out the light at Kroger and Kmart and right turn only there, and there's some other improvements on Scottsville Road, and everyone who goes on Scottsville Road knows it must be improved.
Well, it depends what time of day you go. You could still be there. Yeah. But 6 lanes is what you'd like to see happen
really
on Scottsville Road?
I really would. And there's a prototype model at Somerset. They have a similar situation, and you can go up to the corner and do a U-turn, and it really works well.
It improves the flow.
Right. One other thing I would like to mention in the road plan was our $750,000 to match 1.2 that we've got for scheduled air service, hopefully to Chicago.
Scheduled air service?
Yes, you have to. With these folks, we're talking with American, United, several other companies, Delta, and we think we can get scheduled air service to Chicago several days a week, up and back. But you have to guarantee these folks that they won't lose any money for 2 years. So we've got $2 million to
State
make,
monies?
well, $750,000 of state money, and we've raised the rest. There's some
Who's
grants.
the we? Oh, grants and
There's
just
some
different.
grants and some ticket sales and various things. I think as far as economic development, I think that's one of the most important things that we can do in this. We know we have lost some businesses because we do not have scheduled air service. And if you could go to Chicago, then you can go anywhere from there. And I think once we get air service, that we can get one going south or some going south.
Move from there, so that would be scheduled air service out of Warren County
Yes.
Regional Airport,
Yes.
and it would be
Yes.
to Chicago there and back.
Yes.
Now, is that going to affect the air traffic in Warren County?
Well, of course it would on those days, but you know, and we've got a great airport. I have been in most of the airports in Kentucky. It's a great airport. It was built and expanded during World War II, and the main runway's over a mile long, and it can accommodate any kind of air service. And think about it, you wouldn't have to go to Nashville and go down that terrible 2-lane road after you get into Tennessee, 2-lane I-65. You wouldn't have to pay to park. You wouldn't have to ride a bus to park. You know, it would really be convenient.
This is $750,000 in the budget that
Yes.
was approved
Yes.
At the
Yes.
close of the special
Yes.
session, or the regular session,
Yes.
sorry. That's not a good word to say, special
No,
session,
we don't
is it?
like
We'll
that
talk
word.
about that. But so when could this become a reality, that there would be
Well,
scheduled air service?
the money will be available in July, 1st of July, or the end of end of June, and but we know we're going to get it. So the airport manager is already talking with prospects, and I have great hopes for this. I think it's really important. We're, of course, the largest city in Kentucky that doesn't have scheduled air service. Even cities smaller than us, like Pikeville and Owensboro and Paducah, but they are all kind of special because they're a long way from big airports.
From
We're
larger
fairly
airports.
close.
We are fairly close. So is this something that the public can comment on, or it's pretty much once the monies are there, it's a done
Well,
deal?
I think it's the money is there. It's been a top priority of the chamber, of the city and county, and of the legislature. We've really been pushing this for some time.
So to be determined. Now, you heard me make that little slip about, I said regular special session when I meant to say regular session, and you said don't say that, that's a...
Right.
Well, whenever a regular session ends, there's always the threat, the looming threat, if you will, that a special session will be called. And a lot of citizens don't like it because it costs a lot of money to call the legislators back to Frankfort, as much as $65,000 a day. So at the end of the session, when you get out of there at midnight in Frankfort, it was this morning actually, you were probably hoping, okay, nobody said anything about a special session, but then today the call is coming in particular from Robert Stivers.
Well,
That they call.
I don't think that's imminent, personally. And since we had annual sessions in 2000, the number of special sessions has greatly reduced. One governor called 8 special sessions in one 4-year period. We've only had 8 since 2000. So, and those have been very short, usually 5 days. So the citizens have benefited by annual sessions in that regard. And it does annual sessions gives us more time to analyze the legislation, and we actually deal with fewer bills. I don't think there will be a special session. The governor has to call that, as you know, not the legislature, and he would never call a special session when the items are not agreed upon beforehand. So and really, I'm for a anti-heroin bill.
Well,
but there were
let's
some
explain
problems.
why you're saying that. Robert Stivers,
Yes.
the Senate president, is
Yeah.
calling for a special session to deal with this
Right.
anti-heroin bill, which you'll probably have to explain, but it didn't get passed. Was
It didn't get
overlooked in the
passed.
regular session.
Started dealing with it at 12 minutes to midnight. It had 24 amendments on it, so there was no way it was going to be
24 amendments?
24.
I asked you before we started taping, I said, what's the common number of amendments on a bill? And you said?
One or two.
Yeah.
Sometimes
24.
none, but one or two. And so there's just everybody that I know wants an anti-heroin bill, but it sort of depends on the maximum sentences on various users or sellers or whatever, and certainly those who are providing, you want to have maximum penalties for those folks, but users, you want to try to help these people get off of heroin, and some people didn't think there was enough emphasis on that aspect of it.
Well, the fact that Kentucky is looking at an anti-heroin bill suggests that maybe there's a heroin problem in the Commonwealth. So you mentioned that this was introduced by Katie Steen, who comes from the northern Kentucky area.
Yeah.
So it's an issue there?
It's an issue all over the state. As we have clamped down on meth and prescription drugs, something pops up in its place, and apparently heroin is fairly inexpensive as related to the others, and so it has popped up, and there have been quite a few overdoses, and a nephew of one of our legislators overdosed, and she was very adamant about wanting to promote treatment to try to get these folks off of heroin, and so it's a complicated issue.
Complicated issue. You don't think they're going to call a special session
don't think
related
so.
to that complicated issue? We're going to talk more about some of the issues and some of the business of state as we talk about the wrap of the 2014 regular session of the Kentucky General Assembly when Kentucky Outlook continues. Stay with us. Kentucky Outlook continues. We're talking about the recently ended 2014 session of the Kentucky General Assembly. Joining us now is Senator Mike Wilson, who represents the 32nd District of Kentucky, which is Warren County.
It's all of
Warren County, you got
That's
it.
right.
Thank you for joining us. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about the roads and the money for roads that was approved in the session, and then we got into the anti-heroin bill. I was going to say heroism, anti-heroin, and the call for a special session by Robert Stivers. Jody doesn't think that's going to happen. Your opinion on that?
I really don't think that's going to happen either. I think that if we were unable to get a road plan or a budget, that's really a call for, a constitutional duty that we have. But outside of that, I think you're not going to see a special session for that particular piece of legislation, in my opinion.
Okay, so that's the call today. How soon does one have to make a request for a special session? Before,
Well,
is there a window?
No, there is no window. The governor only calls
call
a
it.
special session, so people very often call for special sessions, but only the governor can do that, and only if everybody's decided that on the details of it. So because
you
of
said.
expense.
Because of expense, but if it were some kind of budget issue or road issue, if that had not been passed, then we'd be maybe looking at a special session.
Right, right.
Because that's constitutional.
That is
Yes, that's
constitutional.
budget.
We did our constitutional duty.
We did.
You did, and you closed up shop at midnight on April 15th. Let's talk a little bit about budget, because the fact that WKU PBS is affiliated with the university, Western Kentucky University, we were getting the updates throughout the session. Budget, we have to start tightening that belt, as so many agencies across the state need to do as well. How are we faring as it relates to budget in the state of Kentucky?
Well, overall, I would say that, I was, certainly nobody got everything they wanted, and again, was not happy with the cuts to higher education, but overall, I think that we came out with a pretty good budget from the standpoint of what we had to work with. I think we were able to fund K through 12 education with the SEEK funding. We were able to give raises to teachers, which hadn't had them in about 7 years, 7 years.
Time.
Gave state workers raises, which they haven't had in a long time too as well. And for us here in Warren County, we were able to get the money in for the commuter air service. We were able to get the money for the Gatton Academy. The cut for higher ed was mitigated a little bit, only to 1.5%, as well as projects. I don't know if y'all have talked about that.
Not yet.
So I thought it was a pretty good compromise.
You're saying the word compromise, and I'm getting a sense from just talking with you and, of course, keeping up with the session. There was a lot of, I'm not going to go so far as to say camaraderie, but it seemed like everyone tried to work together.
Well, they did. And the thing, compromise, is the way the budget works in Kentucky. The governor has to propose a balanced budget. The House then wrestles with it for a while, and then it goes to the Senate, and then a joint conference committee between the House and Senate get together, and they do compromise. They come up with a final plan, and certainly having the science building, the north wing of the Thompson Science Complex, there's $48 million for replacement there. Of course, it's been closed because it's so out of date, and so it's really needed. And there's some money to renovate the central wing also. And of course, the Gatton Academy, there will be there's a $10 million donation to contribution to the university to redo Snyder Hall to accommodate 60 more people, to take it to 200 rather than 120, so 80 more people. And we're excited about that because that 200 was the number that we wanted to begin with.
In the first place. And the Gatton Academy, Mike, share with us what that is as it relates to Western Kentucky University. It has again been recognized as one of the best high schools.
Well, 2 years in a row,
Yeah.
actually, it's rated as the best high school in the United States. And so we're a little bit proud of that, as the Speaker was talking about, that in fact expanding it to 200 students, you know, that's huge. And without the money from the state, you might have lost that. And so that was one of the things that we were fighting for on both sides, making sure that that stayed in the budget, and thankfully it did.
Well, we have our area legislators who go to Frankfort and have to fight and lobby for what's happening in these parts. But when you're talking higher education, you're up against the big guys, you know, University of Kentucky, Louisville. And so that's always a bit of a struggle, isn't it?
It is. You know, it to me, and Senator Wilson is exactly right. We were able to mitigate the cut somewhat, but for me personally, to talk about providing $80 million to expand Rupp Arena when we're cutting universities even 1.5% is crazy. I mean, from my perspective, I think higher education deserves better treatment, and we fought for that and did everything we could. But you certainly, when you have to cut universities, that means that kids are going to have to pay more. There's nothing that the university can do about that. Mm-hmm. And I think we're getting to a point that's pretty dangerous in terms of what students have to pay in tuition. So I hope that next time, 2 years from now, we can come up with more money for the universities to try to help them defray the cost for. Now,
where's that money going to come from?
Yeah. Now we did make the key scholarships whole, and plus there's a CAP grant for needy students that runs out pretty quickly. But all of this comes from the lottery.
From the lottery.
Right. Well, and I just think that when you're looking at it, certainly things that are thrown around quite a bit is tax reform. And we did a few little things in regards to that, but I think overall, within the next 2 years, in fact, I think next year would be a great year to do tax reform, because elections are over. Everybody, I think, would be more focused at that time. You're not dealing with a filing deadline or anything like that. And if we could get some work started on that in the interim, to get to a point where you have more of an agreement going in. That's the hard part, I think, is because there are so many ideas out there putting a plan together. If we could work on it in the interim and have some agreement going in, I think it would make it a lot easier.
You know, we desperately need tax reform in this state because the budget, the amount of money that's coming in simply will not sustain the needs of the people, and we do need tax reform. May I mention one other thing on higher education?
Sure.
The community colleges, of course, we have a large community college here too, which in some ways is a feeder to the university because they have an articulation agreement, and they will be able to build a $16 million classroom building. They're the fastest, as Western is the fastest growing university, they're the fastest growing community college in the state. So they have needs, and I'm pleased to see that also.
Well, you know, let's get back to tax reform. What would some kind of tax reform in the state of Kentucky look like, in your opinion, Mike?
Well, I think that you really have to broaden the tax base, and that's one of the issues where people a little bit disagree. They disagree on exactly how do you do that, and what is it that you're going to tax? Are you going to tax services? Or are you going to tax, still, they look at it, some people look at it as a regressive tax if you begin to tax groceries or things like that. And so those are things that have to be worked out between, and you come to agreement on what you're going to tax and how you're going to broaden that tax base to where you could actually, in some cases, people say that you could actually lower the sales tax by broadening tax base with services and some other things.
Services, of course, is the fastest growing. When the sales tax was enacted, goods were where the sales tax was mainly put, but now services have grown so much, and that's where the money is. We do now eliminate. We do not have sales tax on food, residential utilities, and prescription drugs. And I'm not in favor of putting it on any of those three, but other things, certainly certain services would be good. And many of our peer states have gone in that route, lowering the income tax and expanding the sales tax to services. Now, it is regressive in some sense, but keeping it off of the three big things that I mentioned certainly makes it less regressive than most other states.
Less regressive, more regressive.
Yeah.
We're quickly running out of time. Mike, we didn't get to ask you this in the first segment, but of what are you most proud when you look at the 2014 session and you walk away from it and you actually exhale? What is it you're going to look back and say, we did good?
Well, I think that we came up with a fiscally responsible budget and were able to fund K through 12 education, which we hadn't been able to do that in the previous years. In fact, they've suffered a lot of cuts, as well as higher ed has too. So looking at also the KETS funding for them, the Flex Focus funding, they haven't had any of that. I think funding Teach for America, putting money in the budget for that, and Advance Kentucky, hugely successful program, funding for that as well. So I look at it from the education standpoint. I think that K through 12, I'm very proud of what we've done there.
And how are we faring in the state of Kentucky? How are we faring when we look at the other states in this country? You know, Kentucky for many years always seems to fall to the bottom. We always say thank you for Mississippi, right? Are we still in that place?
We've come farther faster than any other state.
Farther faster. And
I don't know of any state that hasn't borrowed something from the Education Reform Act. Now, Senate Bill 1 a few years ago did sort of update the Education Reform Act, and I think in a good way. And but our kids are faring really well. And what is ironic about that is that our teacher salaries are very low as compared with other states, and yet we expect more from them. And but I think we have a great teacher cadre and a great school system statewide, and in many areas we're in the top 10 now.
It's all about priorities, all about priorities. We're just about out of time. It's an election year. You want to make a statement about that?
Well, it is an election year, and of course I'm up for election as both of us are at this time, but at this point for myself, I do not have an opponent, so that's always nice to be able to say that you're unopposed, and some people say that's because you're doing a good job. I'd like to think that.
I have an opponent, and I look forward to a good, strong, clean campaign. And I've been in the legislature 39 years, and I've had lots of opponents, and really I think it makes a person a better legislator to have an opponent and discuss issues.
And work toward a spirited campaign,
Yes,
right?
that's
Spirited.
correct.
Representative Jody Richards and Senator Mike Wilson representing Kentucky. That's going to wrap it up for this week's edition of Kentucky Outlook. We're glad you joined us. We'll see you next time.